Hi, so I thought today I'd show you a little bit about making a diamond kind of block. I've used a couple of colours in this. So basically what we're doing is doing a half rectangle. Now a half rectangle is quite a different story to a half square. Half squares are relatively easy, but a half rectangle is probably not quite as easy, but it's kind of fun to do because you can make some really interesting shapes. So I thought we'd go through what I've done to make this. The size that I've made here is quite a nice large size. It's kind of fun, it showcases fabric nicely. So I'm calling this sort of light grey my background, and then I've obviously got a green and a red here. So I'm going to make a similar block, but I'm going to be using the same background, but I'm going to be using the red and a blue instead of the green. So I thought I'd just show you what I've done to achieve this. So what we're going to do is have some rectangles, and I've cut them at a ratio of 2 to 1. So in other words, I've got it 5 inches wide and it's twice as long, so it's 10 inches long. So that's just where I've started. You could make them any size, of course, they're going to end up a different size. But I've started with 5 inch by 10 inch, so maybe if you had a layer cake, you could use your layer cake. If you've got some 5 inch strips, you know, all those things. So on your background square, so that's going to be all your lightest colour probably, it wouldn't really matter, but in my case it's my 4 corners, so my background. You want to rule a line, so you want to just rule a line. Now I should also just mention that there are different ways of doing half rectangles. Some people have a different method, slightly more technical perhaps. The way I'm doing it is the way I'm showing you. It's worked out, it's relatively straightforward, and I just thought it would be something that you might like to have a go at. So I'm just drawing a line that goes from point to point on the diagonal. Now we do need to know that in order to make them so that they're going in 2 different directions, so you've got one this way and one this way, you do need to draw your lines in opposite directions on the diagonal. So this one's going this way, so I've just drawn that one, and this one's going to go this way, and again point to point, but in the opposite direction to the other one. So we're now going to position these onto their other coloured rectangles, right sides together, and you want to put the corner to the corner. So it should sit pretty much exactly. What you're going to find is that we're going to be stitching either side of this drawn line, and some bits are going to be a little bit short because we will be trimming later. Like I said, there's no super easy way to do a rectangle. You're going to have to either cut shapes differently or measure them differently, or you're going to have to trim when you've made it. So I've gone for the trim when you've made it. You may want to pop some pins. Yes, even I'm using pins today, just to hold those rectangles together on that funny angle. And I'll get the other one ready while I'm here. So right sides together. Pop your corners together, so the corners are actually just absolutely sitting so that the corners are touching, no other overlapping or anything like that. So now I'm going to go to the sewing machine and I'm going to sew now either side of that drawn line. So we want to do 1/4 of an inch either side. So there will be, as I mentioned, some areas that look like they're not really matching up, and you're quite right, they're not, but we are going to need to trim. So I'm going to come down here 1/4 of an inch either side. I've got my 1/4 inch foot on, so it's all working well. And I want to come back around the other side. I'm now coming down the other side of that drawn line. And I need to do the other one too, so I might quickly run that one through so that we can show you everything. So you could get into a system if you're doing a few of chain piecing, or not. So I've done all of that. Now I can take my pins out. Very happy to do that so that they won't attack me. And now, we've got 2 lines of sewing. You can probably see it better on this side, 1/2 inch apart, because we've got that centre line that we drew down the middle there. So now we need to cut along that drawn line. So point to point. And the same on the other one. And then we need to bring the iron over and we need to do some pressing. And we're going to have some slightly funny shapes because then we need to trim them so that they behave as we'd like them to. So the other thing I'm going to suggest now with the pressing is that it would be kind of nice if we pressed everything into the colour or not, but you'll find that things will nestle together when we come to joining up these edges and the points and things. If you push one colour towards the colour and push the other colour seam towards the background, everything will nestle much nicer for you. So on this blue I'm pushing that colour towards the background. I like to press from the front. Let that, so just be a little bit aware you are on an unusual angle with that seam. Things might want to stretch, so try not to stretch things as you press them. The seam's going over into the background, so we'll do both of those at the same time so we don't get confused. Into the background again, so just pop that over just carefully, just so that it's sitting. Try not to stretch anything, and we've got some funny little bits sticking out which we'll deal to shortly. Now this one we're going to press into the red rather than into the background so that we can nestle our seams nicely. Make sure things are sitting as straight as you can with all this. Because what happens when you're on a diagonal, even not a true diagonal, the fabric becomes quite stretchy, so just be aware of that when you're sewing it and also when you're pressing it. Okay, so now comes the little tricky part. So currently our pieces are a little bit of a funny shape. They might have wandered a little bit, but that's okay. We're going to trim them now, and I'm just going to go to the 10 mark here so that I can see how long I'm going to be. Try and line things up. As you can see, it's gone a little bit wonky. We'll sort that out in a minute. So I'm calling the wider colour edge the bottom edge and the background the top. So on the bottom edge I think you should trim off 3/4 of an inch. So the way to do that would be to line this edge up with one of the lines on the board and your 1/4 inch in line on your ruler on the next 1 inch line, so that it's 1/4 of an inch into this inch, so that it's 3/4 from here to here. So that's what we want to cut off. So we're going to trim that off. And we can do that on all of them. While we're here, make sure you trim the right edge. So 3/4. So lining up the edge, come along 3/4 of an inch and trim that off. And we'll do it the same thing on both of these. Line that edge up. And if it's sitting slightly wonky, just sit it so that it's looking fairly comfortable and basically straight for the whole shape. As I said, this is not super exact, but you can end up with a very nice result by doing this trimming up. What we should be aiming for when we're doing this trimming, and I should mention this, is that this edge here to where the seam is should be 1/4 of an inch on that. So where you've cut it so that it's sticking over 1/4 of an inch, that should sit at 1/4 of an inch, so that when you take your next seam allowance and when you join pieces here and you take this edge seam allowance, that will be at the edge point. So that's where you want it to be, because this is a funny angle, you don't want it to be sort of too wide or too narrow. It's sitting quite nicely. It should be 1/4 of an inch in from the edge. So we've done all the bottom edges. So what we now want to do is we want to make it, we're basically taking off about 1/2 inch on the other end. It wants to be 8.5 inches long. So coming along here, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Currently it's about 9. We want to trim off 1/2 inch off the top to make it 8.5. And the same thing is going to apply here with that seam. That should now be sitting 1/4 of an inch in from that edge at the 1/4 inch, and it's doing pretty well there, so that's looking pretty good. So we'll get all these trimmed. So we're taking off 1/2 inch here, we did 3/4 on the bottom, and we're going to do it around the right way, and we're going to take off 1/2 inch off the top. I hope you were watching. Okay, 1/2 inch off the top, so they should end up at 8.5 inches long, and another 1/2 inch off the top here. Whoops, turn it around. And we're looking pretty good so far. Now you may just need to tidy up the sides a fraction because things move a little bit. We want them to measure 4.5 inches wide. So I'm actually a fraction shy on that one, but I think we're okay. But this edge here is looking like it needs a little bit of a trim up. Move over so that's it's looking pretty good. 4.5 there. Just to try and have your edges sitting nice and straight where we can. So I'll just go ahead and check that these are all at 4.5. Now what you should be seeing on these is that there's a little bit of a bit more of the red most likely, and a bit more of the background at the other end. That is how it should look. It may be slightly off that, but that's already looking like 4.5, so that one's good. If you're trimming this part, it should only really be a little whisker that you need to trim off. It shouldn't be a major exercise, but sometimes the little whisker can make all the difference. So there's like a little tiny whisker. That's all I've trimmed. There's a tiny little bit there just to straighten it. And it's just because when we're sewing these angles and things can move a little bit, and it's fabric, it's a movable commodity, so you can't always get everything absolutely exact. You can get it pretty close though. Okay, so we've made all those. They're all now the right size. So you can have a lot of fun with these. You can make some little pyramid type shapes. You can come this way. You could be making some diagonal type stripes, because if you had another blue one it would end up down there. You know, there's lots of different ways. It's kind of like a sawtooth. You could make a whole lot to make a sawtooth type border. But today we're making one of these. But there's lots of uses for half rectangles. So now we want to join these together, and we want to join these together in order to make this particular block. So now we're just ready to put them together and sew the seam to join two pairs, and because we pressed our seams in opposite directions, we can now nestle those seams nicely and stitch all the way down the seam there. And pop the other one in while we're here. I often prefer to start where there's little points and joins at that end rather than coming up on them at the end. And now we need to press. Now I would suggest at this stage that you press these seams open, just because of the bulk of this join of the points up there. So it tends to sit quite nicely if you press this one open. Oh, it's so exciting. This little block's going to look kind of fun. So you could make multiples of these to put in a quilt. You could just have a scattered one here and there. You could make pretty much anything you like with these blocks. And just press that from the right side. So when you're pressing seams open, you have to do it from the wrong side till they're open, and then come back and press over them. So now we just need to join these two together, and then we'll have our block done. So now you want to match your seam. Now you can't nestle it when it's pressed open, so you might want to pop a little pin or something in there to hold it. However, you should still be able to nestle quite well at this edge here. is just about finished. Now you could decide whether you want to press that seam open or not. I'm not going to. I'm just going to press it in one direction. And there we have the second block. So that was how to do a half rectangle triangle into a diamond type block with two colours, and I think that's going to look kind of fun. When we join them together we could have a nice row of diamonds, or not, as you wish with how you do that. So a half rectangle, remember we started with strips 5-inch rectangles, 5-inch by 10-inch, and we've come down and our block now is measuring, it should measure 8.5 inches by 16.5 inches because of what we trimmed it down to. And I think you'll find that that's quite a good size block to use for all sorts of things. So enjoy the half rectangle diamond block.